Alrighty gamers, Outriders here, and today I have some beginner tips and advice for all of you brand new Outrider gamers after my first couple of days of playing, so let's get started. Let's talk about gear first. During Outriders, you're going to have tons and tons of gear dumped on you at all times, especially as you start to reach the teen levels. There is almost no reason to not constantly be rotating your gear in and out in order to keep up with world tier difficulty. You should be constantly dismantling and selling your junk items. I personally have been dismantling a lot more than I've been selling, as I value the materials a bit more than the scrap at the moment, but that might change in the future. Plus, dismantling allows you to get mods for weapons and armor for you to use later with the crafting and modding system in the game. You'll get access to modding and upgrading within a couple of missions. While I don't think you need to bother with everything it has to offer immediately, the mod option is going to be very, very helpful early on. While you level, most of the mods you get from dismantling gear will be tier 1, aka the lowest tier. But these mods, when synergized properly with your abilities, will be very powerful. More powerful than if you just ignore them. Tier 1 mods are dirt cheap to mod into your gear, only costing some leather. The game doesn't really demand you constantly be modding your gear all the time as you level, but every mission or so, it wouldn't be a terrible idea to equip your highest level items, junk the rest, and toss in some mods for abilities that you're currently using. This might help you get past a difficult mission or world tier. We're going to talk crafting later in the video. Legendary weapons are probably the only thing that I think you should avoid dismantling, especially if you get one while leveling. The returns you get from dismantling a legendary are not worth the potential power of that legendary weapon, especially considering that you can slowly level it up, keeping it relevant as long as you want. Number 2 is auto looting. Auto loot does two things. The first is that you can hit a keybind that will automatically pick up everything in the zone that has dropped. On PC, the default is H, and on console, I think it's down on the D-pad. But also, it'll automatically pick up everything in the zone when you leave a zone according to the loot threshold that you've set in the options menu, and that also goes for the keybind. For your first playthrough, I would recommend keeping this on lower levels, as mass dismantling items in Outriders has been made incredibly easy. As you progress through the game, then you can set it higher and higher. To dismantle, you can either mark individual items and then dismantle all of them at once, or you can just dismantle everything of a specific rarity. All those greens that you picked up that you don't want, one button to dismantle. Done. Number 3 is the world tier chart. Every time you unlock a new world tier, there is a loot drop waiting for you in this screen. Be sure to grab it. The game appears to really value having teammates in higher world tiers. While my friend and I have steadily climbed to World Tier 8 as a duo without much issue, solo players might start to struggle on their first character as they approach World Tiers 4, 5, or 6. I imagine to push into those teen-level World Tiers, 3-player teams or strong duos will be a must until you start decking yourself out in top-tier items, or unless you're an absolute gamer. It is really not worth bashing your head against higher world tier difficulties if you're struggling, especially in the early game while you're leveling. There will be time to get much higher level gear after you've played the story. Some people have intentionally kept their world tiers low to blast through the story just to get to expeditions faster, expeditions being the post-campaign content. In fact, you may be able to level faster by staying on lower world tiers, which would come in handy for leveling alternate characters who are looking to hit the endgame quickly. However, don't feel the need to rush through the game your first time through just to get to expeditions. Or just do whatever you want, I don't really care. Number 4, status effects. There are a lot of status effects in the game, but a lot of them do very similar things. For example, Ash and Freeze do the same thing, but Ash's effect lasts for 2.5 seconds, while Freeze's effect lasts for 3.5 seconds. Toxic, Bleed, and Burn also have similar effects. They deal damage over time, with the main differences being how much damage based on the effect. Bleed does the least amount of damage over time at 2.5% of ability power every half second, while Burn does the most at 3.7%. Toxic does 3.5%. You can apply one of each of these effects on a target. Applying an effect again just refreshes the duration. The difference between vulnerable and weakness is that vulnerable makes enemies take more damage from you, and weakness makes enemies deal less damage to you. Finally, slow reduces movement and attack speed by various percentages. Elites have status resistances, making many effects not as strong on them. How do I know all of this? Well, there's a very handy guide in the escape menu that not only covers this, but many other aspects of the game, like skills, crafting, items, enemies, and more. In fact, I imagine most of what I'm explaining in this video can probably be found in that very guide. It has been a very helpful tool. Number 5 is the stash. If you plan on using multiple characters during your time with Outriders, you'll want to use the stash to transfer weapons in between characters. However, you won't be able to use guns that you don't have the levels for. World tiers add bonus levels for items that you can equip. So for example, if you're a level 15 playing on World Tier 5, you can equip items up to level 17, since World Tier 5 gives you a +2 level bonus. But if you drop down to World Tier 4, that bonus is now only +1, limiting you to level 16 items. Just something to be aware of when transferring guns to other characters. Number 6 is crafting, which is unlocked relatively early in the game. There are many ways to modify your weapons and armor, and a good amount of currencies to go with it. Starting from the top of the menu, there's Improve Rarity. Pretty self-explanatory there. It raises the rarity of your items, but it can only be used on greens and blues. And it uses titanium, which is a much rarer resource than the others early in the game. For that reason, I wouldn't really bother with Improve Rarity while you're still leveling up, especially if the upgrades are flowing. Next, we have Raise Attributes, which might be one of the more slightly confusing things, so let's break this one down. Each armor or weapon drop you get has certain stats on it. In the case of armor, things like maximum health, long range damage, cooldown reduction, bonus firepower, etc. With weapons, it's crit damage, status power, close and long range damage, etc. Whenever you dismantle a weapon or armor piece of a high enough rarity, you will get shards of a certain bonus on that weapon or armor. The shards that you'll get are indicated by this shard icon. So, in this example, if I dismantle this helm, the shards I'll get are anomaly power shards, and the amount is equal to the level of the item. So a level 19 item gets 19 shards. To upgrade anomaly power on an item, you would need anomaly power shards, and that goes for every other stat. You can see how many shards you have by hovering over your shards in your resources section on this page. Next is modding your gear. If you would like to switch a mod in an armor piece or a weapon, you come here. Mods come from dismantling gear with said mods in it. Keep in mind, though, that you can only mod one slot. Swap variant is pretty self-explanatory as well. If you have a weapon and you want to change how it fires, you do this. Simple enough. Level up item is also pretty simple. Spend titanium to level up an item. Not something I would really bother with until a bit later in the game, or if you have legendaries from the early game. Number 7 is a smaller thing, class points and skills. Your class points can be reset for free at basically any time. You do not have to stress about where to put your class points. Your skills can also be swapped in and out very freely, except when they're on cooldown. Be sure to experiment here to see what you like. Finally, number 8, screen shake and motion blur. These were two massive gripes in the demo in that people wanted to tone them down or turn them off completely. You can now do that in the main game. In the options menu, go to gameplay and find cinematic camera smoothing and crank it all the way up. In the display settings, go all the way down to motion blur and turn it off. While I personally don't usually mind motion blur in my games, the motion blur in Outriders is a bit more extreme than what I'm used to, so I turned it off and my Twitch chat thanked me for it. Those are my beginner tips for Outriders. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time.